Okay. All rise for the jury. All right, we can be seated. Mr. Moran, the defense opening.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mark did not kill his child.
Mr. Moran, I'm going to stop you right there. First and last name or last name? All right? That's been a rule in this courtroom ever since you've started here.
Your Honor, we have several Mr. Redwine.
All right, then you call him Mark Redwine.
Sitting over here, listening to counsel, couldn't help but think. There was a time when I would have believed the worst thing that could happen, losing a child. There's something dramatically worse. What Mr. Redwine's experiencing sitting in the courtroom today, falsely accused. Dramatically worse than losing your child is losing your child and being falsely accused of causing that child's death. In this world, there are two camps. The first are people who have not experienced untimely, tragic death. And the second, Mr. Redwine has. And to everyone else, suffering and pain over the loss of Dylan Redwine. We see their hurt. We acknowledge their grief. We make room for their anger. But their blame is misplaced. Mr. Redwine did not kill his child. This is words 50 times until right now. Mr. Redwine, I'd gladly give my life so that he could have his. That's how a dad speaks about his kid. That's how Mr. Redwine spoke about his child. He still speaks about his child. What this case boils down to is the difficulty humans have around the loss of a child. Bereaved spouse, a widow, a child is lost to a parent, an orphan. We haven't come to name the experience of losing a child because it's not supposed to happen. It scares us. It stirs us to anger. And if there's one thing that's consistently true about human beings, when we're angry, when we're scared, our reason is compromised. You'll see that in this case. A river of grief can flow through this courtroom. And generally well-meaning people, hard-working professionals, are going to call for a wrongful conviction. Born of the grief and reason. Mr. Redwine, in addition to losing his child, lost everything else. He's holding the two of them next to each other. None of the attachments matter. But Mr. Redwine lost his home, his livelihood, his family, his community, the benefit of doubt and leadership. He lost it all, and now sits here with this demand for a wrongful conviction. All stands justice for Dylan. Justice for Dylan is not wrongful conviction for father. Ladies and gentlemen, you've got a tough job. It's going to take grit. It's going to take courage to reject the calls from generally well-meaning people, to reject the calls for wrongful conviction from people who are hurting and people who are angry. They've come too far to make their mistakes. They've come too far to acknowledge that there's better truth, that animals is the damage Dylan Redwine father and his father. We glossed over it in their remarks. I want to start with this one essential question and then move into things that were left out by legal counsel and prosecution and momentarily. But this one essential question informs the entirety of the case. There's one that's consistent with your common sense and one that will be borne out by the facts. And that one essential question: would Dylan have left his father's house on the morning of November 19, 2012, while his dad was at work? And anybody who knows 13, anybody who can look back and remember being 13, knows that 13-year-olds are experiencing increasing independence and absolutely would leave their father's house and dad's at work, and when the child has been told no the evening before. So let's hold these two things up next to each other. That Mr. Redwine, admittedly imperfect and flawed, Dylan has facts beyond change. Dylan doesn't want to be told no again. The evening before, when he said he wanted to go spend time with Brian Nava, after he just flown in, Dad said no. And Dylan says, I'll show you why this prospect that is consistent with your common sense and is consistent with the fact that will come into this courtroom is the essential question of this case. And then we hold it up next to what the prosecution is describing to you: dark, speculative, fantasy monster, this drunken criminal mastermind, chops and dismembers his child in the middle of the night, bashed his skull in, but no blood. No blood in the way they're describing to you. And he did all of this. Shitty, or dehumanized. And that'll make it easier for a wrongful conviction. And then he does all this and he's no trace. And also that he reports it immediately. Rather than taking the time that he has for the child in his sole custody today, he goes to the Bayfield Marshal's office, has law enforcement searching him in his house on November 9th and November 10th. And then the FBI truck that looks like out of ET maybe, and the Colorado Bureau of Investigation's truck several days after that, searching his home. Before we get there, I want to cover a couple of things. Busted clicker. So the answer to the one essential question: yes. 13-year-old told no the evening before would leave his dad's house. What else supports that? Well, we know that Dad had already said no. The texts were shown to you in opening argument by the prosecution. This is Dylan. He signs his text messages with his face with a statue, a demonstration that there's increasing independence. He starts to talk to his 13-year-old friend. And his friend is asking, did your dad say no? And he says yes. More reasons to take off. He's irritated with his dad. His dad doesn't really have any Thanksgiving plans. Dad's been out in the oil fields in Silver City, New Mexico for weeks, just getting into town right before Dylan arrives in the Durango, by the Vito area. And Dad's suggesting, well, why don't we go up to your uncle's place in Castle Rock, which is where Dylan just flew in. And why else would he take off? His buddy Ryan, just down the road. Why else would he take off? Because there's a contempt citation sitting on the kitchen table. And we know that when Dylan becomes aware of his father saying things that are critical of his mom or his older brother, that upsets him. We know that because Dylan told that to the judge. We know that when that happened, that Dylan takes off. He says it himself.
So they're making all the dad frustrated, so I kind of still off.
It's actually a pretty sophisticated coping technique for a little kid. I go off and do my own thing and that's that. We have more corroborative history that Dylan would have taken off that morning while his dad was at work. Parental alienation is encouraged. His mom and dad had been in an acrimonious custody proceeding, domestic relations proceeding in 2005. And Dylan's father is used as a cudgel, and Dylan is used as a proxy in this alienating co-parenting situation, where the mom is saying, I'm sick, or I'm going to have you go live with your dad. Dad is turned into a punishment for the child. And the text that you saw the prosecution provided there, went through it quickly, but I saw that folks were reading it. But here, when he gets to the airport, mom's saying, glad you're safe, make your dad wait at the baggage claim or out of the arrival area. Dylan's being encouraged not to show the sort of respect for the child who would say, Dad, I'm out of here, I'm going to see my pal. He's being encouraged to show that sort of respect. So that all supports this one essential question answer. Yes, Dylan would take off when he wakes up in the morning and his father's gone. Dylan forgets his phone charger. Why wouldn't he have reached out to his friends and say, hey, my dad's not around, I'm coming over? He routinely forgets his phone charger. The last time he visited Durango, September 3rd, 2012, he doesn't have a phone charger. The only phone charger he has as a backup in Durango is in Dad's car. And Dad's in town, running errands. Dad had to go to town to deal with a payroll issue, wanting to get back into town while it was still fresh in everyone's mind that he worked the hours that he hadn't been credited. It wasn't working for town. Dylan sleeps in frequently, as we know, those of us who spend time around 13-year-olds. But more than that. Dylan had packed himself. He showed up in Durango with no coat, shorts, a T-shirt. He'd been up until 4 a.m. on the 18th. So the day he flew, he spent up until 4 a.m. with his friend. He would have been groggy and tired when he was packing. You know that Dylan hitchhiked. Unusual for 13-year-olds. His friend Ryan Nava said as much to the FBI, that it was kind of cool that Dylan wasn't scared to hitchhike. And his buddy, Tristan Reed, right down the road, 5 miles down the road in town, easy hitchhike, especially up in Vicedo. If people are cool about it, and it's uncommon. The animal damage to Dylan is uncontroverted. They didn't show you that part of the skull. The part of the skull with an apex predator tooth mark on it. It's right at the area of the damage that they would have you believe is blunt force trauma. A mountain lion or a bear. This Dylan, right at the spot where there is damage to the skull that they're saying was caused by blunt force trauma. You know what else is able to give blunt force trauma? The jaw, the bear, or a mountain lion. There was suggestion of cleanup. You'll see the picture. There was no cleanup. The type of cleanup that would have been necessary in this case would have required power washing. The house would have reeked of bleach and pine salt. There would have been tarp with blood on it. There would have been anything to indicate a cleanup. If that wasn't present here, there's no overflowing garbage can, there's no bloody mop. You'll hear crime scene investigators. We're bringing some folks in from the Netherlands to talk about what luminol looks like in luminescence. This is what you can expect from a crime scene that can clean up. It lights up like reality. When there's been blood in the house, and bleach has been used, bleach reacts to luminol. This is what it looks like in a crime scene. And this is what it looks like in a crime scene where there's been cleanup. In the crime scene where there's been cleanup, it's white and luminol. You can put lots of blood, and a lot of it, paint a wall blue. Luminol is very simple. And this is what you'd expect. And you only ever use luminol. You only ever use luminescing agent if you can't see the blood. So these are places where it was sprayed, where they couldn't see until luminescing agent was shown. I want to just point out briefly some of the things that I'm concerned about after listening to counsel's opening argument. Football, giving some people football. I'm concerned that this might be a film that was shown to you in a photograph by the prosecution they're opening. That's not the That's what luminol looks like inside. The amount of luminol that's for us, indicating the presence of iron, which oxidizes with it, was minimal. There are some lawyer words that are annoying. The bar here, like the little section in the courtroom, the inculpatory and exculpatory, I think, are important enough that it makes sense to take a moment to explain inculpatory. That describes something that suggests guilt, like smoking down the machine, bloody knife, stabbing. Exculpatory, you can see there's on the skull, where you think there's what's trauma damage. When there's exculpatory evidence in this case, because of the confirmation bias, ignore it. Junk science is credited. Fake evidence embraced. Biased witnesses endorsed. Some of the most biased witnesses that have ever been through a courtroom with me, those here. They talk to you about this fishing pole. What is it? It makes sense to me that they're furious about it, and they think that it was Mr. Redwine seeking to send them off the trail, send them off the mountain down to the lake that it's been days and weeks. I can understand that frustration. It's cold out. But the reason fishing narrow and honest. I think where you stick your fishing for 13, and then when someone's back, fall down and pushing you over. This is where Mr. Redwine said fishing for himself. He didn't know that the FBI pictures those when we were at his house. If he really treated disputes, sending law enforcement on a wild goose chase, why would he have given them the fishing pole in July 2013? The fishing pole was an obsession of law enforcement that really they had just looked at their case, or if they had not just looked everything that was spoken for, everything that Mark said, that they could have found information that showed that he's being truthful. If they weren't just ignoring and only cherry-picking the things that got them to the ready-made conclusion. Confirmation bias is a thread that connects all of this case. You saw images of this T-shirt, but they don't. That is really worse.
This what?
Banana sticker. Yes. What? It feels sort of strange to be talking to you about a banana sticker in this murder trial, but this banana sticker has been ignored throughout the Bob Dylan shirt, where his own work found. We know Mark doesn't peas and green brown. He doesn't have a lot of vegetables. The feet of the walnut. He's been out of town. And for some reason, they kids' shirts. They totally ignore it. They can do touch DNA. When you touch stuff, you leave DNA. They didn't bother with that. Stickers are an excellent place to find fingerprints. They've never even peeled it off the shirt. He is asked that to test this beer can. This beer can found right in the middle of Dylan's feet. He said, why hasn't this been paid more attention to? It is at the precise location of hair and fabric collected in this case. When they did have our request, they found another man's DNA on it. But they stopped there because it's exculpatory, without running it through the system to see if there's any other evidence of who that man may be. All felons are in their system. Below it are evidence of 33, 34, 35. That's all it is. Another one that shield, draw, T-shirt, shield. With my remaining 37 minutes, these things I want to cover with you. DNA is the gold standard. I want you to hear about the DNA first, because it's the evidence that can't be manipulated. It doesn't work with you. So, unless you misinterpret it, it doesn't go along with confirmation bias. It's what all of the rest of the evidence should be held up next to. The junk science, in this case, dogs, have way more demonstrably false alerts than anything else. The dogs are unreliable. The animals disagree and say things that are contrary to our common sense. Biased scientists who start at a conclusion and work backwards. Bad science, junk science. The evidence in this case, fake evidence. The notion that Mr. Redwine is shitty, and he's killed every time someone says that, fake evidence. As is the motive that was created by Facebook vigilantes, the mind readers, all of the people who want to say that my child has gone missing and my community turned against me and protests and held outside my house. I would have acted differently. Those mind readers, none of them have a lost child. None of them have met people who've gone through it in the way that Mr. Redwine. The witnesses are biased. Police officers in this case chose sides in the divorce. The neighborhood watcher who didn't like Mark before she told her story.
Mr. Moran, that's the second time third time, actually. The second time, I didn't stop you. Mark Redwine. So pay attention to what you're saying.
DNA, gold standard. So the couch cushion, Colorado Bureau of Investigation, item number 2.1. It's positive for blood as was described to you by the prosecution. It matches Dylan. It's the only spot in the house that's entirely blood. It's 1.9 nanograms. Infinitesimally small. The amount of blood you expect to see in anybody's house, certainly in this room. Infinitesimally small, unsurprising, of course. 13-year-olds who pick gas, 13-year-olds who play wood, 13-year-olds who play baseball, football, go fishing, pick popcorn kernels out of their teeth, infinitesimally small. The blood found in the house. It didn't reach in time salt. 0.0006 grams. That's a grain of salt. What we're talking about with these nanograms is a grain of salt cut in half 60,000 times. It's floating in the air. Certainly present in this room. Present in anyone's house. The DNA folks will come in here and they will tell you that it's not surprising the amount of blood that was found in this house and that everybody's house has something like it in it. CBI 3.1, also blood. Corey and Dylan. I disagree with counsel. He said that Corey never bled in the house. He claims that there was an occasion that he had to put a Band-Aid on or otherwise treat a wound in the house. But we know that there's a mixture of Corey and Dylan. We know that it's blood. And we know that the amount is undetermined. So the lab that can find a 60,000th grain of salt couldn't tell us how much of this Corey Redwine and Dylan Redwine there was. Coffee table also has DNA on blood. It's a mixture of Corey, or of Mark Redwine and Dylan Redwine. The only other blood in the house they find 0.39 written in there. Tiny. But the mixture, tell me, how do you have both? The DNA found is unsurprising. The other locations where they find blood are spots where it's DNA, so it's not, it could be spit, dandruff, epithelial cells, on the couch cushion, and the floor by the couch. And each of those are mixtures, mostly Mark Redwine, some Corey Redwine, and an unknown small fraction of Dylan Redwine. The floor by the couch, mostly Corey Redwine, some Dylan Redwine, fraction Mark Redwine. It's unsurprising. The dog who the prosecution stuff, they can't replicate the work these dogs have. It would be simple for them to do. These handlers have part of the human body, and they can take a part of the human body and they could put it somewhere and try to replicate what they are claiming happened here. So Dylan was removed from the house in the night and put up on the mount. That gives a couple of hours. With that body part, you have to train it and prove the dog can do what you claim. You put that body part somewhere in the police station. In this case, the dog's not doing sniffing until 106 days later. And you come back 106 days later to see if the dog can alert in that room where there's been a body part for a few hours, 106 days before. So in the back of that Dodge pickup truck. That Dodge pickup truck had been out in Colorado winter, summer, 14 months before they bring a dog by. And the dog says, oh yeah, there's a human body in the truck. There are demonstrable false alerts all over the place. Here's a dog alerting to the lake. They want to blame Mr. Redwine for sending dogs to the lake. But it's because of the fishing system. But it's really these people with the dog saying, oh yeah, the dog's alerting all over the lake. We're finding remains now in the lake. And that's also misleading. It's not a cadaver dog. These dogs don't smell cadavers. They smell human remains. The human remains are shed by living humans all the time. Blood, teeth, hair. That's all human remains. These dogs are alert to that stuff. Doesn't mean anybody's dead. These dogs are dangerous. Dr. Lisa Litt, she wrote the best study on this. The information provided to you about it. She brought in dogs that had been certified as a law enforcement dog, and these dogs were, the dog handlers were told, in that building, there's drugs, there's bombs. These dogs, 80+% of them, and the handlers had been told that, went in the building and said, yep, dog alerted, drugs, bombs, inside the building. The whole point of the study is to show that handler believed that house. That was the main study. And it turns out there had not been any bombs or drugs in that building. It was just the handler believing that they were what caused the dog to be alert. Here is when they brought small babies, that's one of the dogs that we heard about, up to the mountain. The red spots are locations where actual items and evidence is found. The blue spots were places the dogs were there. And they brought this dog to the location where the dog shouldn't do it. That is in a spot where they were told. Dogs can't do what their handlers tell them. These are all demonstrable false alerts. These are locations in the house where the dog alerted. They seized items and they took them back to the lab. And this lab, where they're able to find things at a 60,000 liquid salt, they couldn't find what these dog handlers claimed was in. They took the fireplace tool, nothing. They took the threshold in Mr. Redwine's house, which must have been frustrating in the wintertime up in Bioscuda. They took, or we know in locations where spots of blood have been found, dogs not alerting in those locations. The dogs have more false alerts than anything else in this case. They seized Mr. Redwine's speakers because the dog alerted on them. He didn't have tune, but they were done. And there was nothing on the speaker. They cut up his carpet because the dog alerted there, and they didn't find anything in the lab. They had a dog alert on the washing machine. Nothing was found on the washing machine. It was presumptive positive for blood, but when you got it to the lab, it wasn't human blood. It was animal blood like that. Or another false alert would be the oxygen. The testing agent. We took pieces of his bathroom apart. Nothing. This is the best response. The handler's not a scientist. You may need to present a scientist for you. You can talk about you always talk about why these animal handlers can't be relied on in making the types of claims they made in this case. The dog alerted on the shoes is spoke to you by a prosecution counsel. No doing it. We're figuring it out to test it. Same with the shirt. Both shirts. The dog alerted to time is limited, we'll get into that later. The locations in the truck, the dog alerted. This isn't a truck that's been seen. If there was anything in it, CBI would have found it. CBI was in fact there, the dog was doing his work. And they were able to rush in and test right with the dog alerted. These dogs are trained to pinpoint on the strongest source of scent. And they were able to bring the lab guy in, test it right away, nothing. They can't corroborate the dog alert because it was false. The wildlife experts that you'll hear from are going to talk about how there's no way that these animals, that an animal would move something more than 5 minutes. It's not consistent with common sense. And to the extent there's some truth in it, because of course energy is what's important in the wild animals. And they wouldn't take as much farther than they needed to. Add in a gunshot, multiply it by 4. And these animals move things. The reason it took them a couple of days from when the people found the skull and they came back, and they had to come back again and again, is because it moved in the interim. That's what happens in nature. It's wild for a reason. Wildlife chews on bones and with minerals. They move things that have sources of energy for them. The distances that we're talking about suggest an animal doesn't cover that with the map. It's up a hill, down up a right to follow the bear constraints. We talk about animals, and this area with the skull is still an animal bone. The skull was found in a coyote's den. The animal damage is uncontroverted. There was some mention of a mark on the skull that there will be someone testifying is consistent with a tool mark. So we'll be calling the guy from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI guy from Quantico. He does tool mark analysis for a living, and he'll tell us, as will some other folks who look at the cut on the skull, that if you use a scanning electron microscope, you can see places of metal. But that wasn't done. The expert you'll hear from that thinks that it was tool mark destroyed evidence. After Dr. France tried to create a mold of the skull, she got material from the mold inside that thing that needed to be scanned, scanning electron microscope. And now we can't look at it because she destroyed it. The tool mark guy from the FBI, the guy whose entire job to look at things, figure out whether a tool did it, that what he's seeing could have been created by the environment, animals, a teeth, a claws, just as easy as the teeth. So only one expert. We want to destroy the evidence so that nobody else can take a look at it with a scanning electron microscope. We definitively figured this out. We can say, there was a tool mark. I don't want to have to use up any longer than this today, but those photographs from deep within Mark's private life, of course, he doesn't want to be confronted about them on national television. If it was correlated with violence, we'd hear about it. Look at the forces of government who raised it. If they could find anyone to say that people who do that are more likely to kill their child, that information would be given to you. There would be a lack of evidence discussed at length today because it doesn't exist. Mr. Redwine was repeatedly confronted about photographs. If there was a one-to-one lineup between these photographs and homicidal rage, you would have seen it on a television show with all the Facebook vigilantes, all them out there, with the vandals who come out to his house, the police who say it to him repeatedly, with his son Corey, who messages him about it, talking about it, jail where he's confronted about it. But more importantly, the trip that Dylan and Mark took from Viacito to Boston to watch baseball, stopping off in Chicago to pizza, through Pittsburgh. Somewhere on this trip, Mark said something that Dylan takes offense at, something with respect to Mr. Redwine, says something that it upsets Dylan Redwine with respect to Dylan Redwine's mom, Elaine Hall, and brother, Corey Redwine. And Dylan Redwine's response is to say, send me the proof this, send me the proof this, send me the proof this, over and over and over and over. If the proposition is that every time Mark is confronted by his child and they're out by themselves, Mark's going to kill, that when he's provided this motive sparker, he murders, then it would have happened somewhere in the vast, wide open spaces between Viacito and Boston. I'm running out of time, so I won't spend a lot of time on this, but the folks who give law enforcement the motive know that they don't have, that law enforcement can't sort through why this loving father would kill his child. And they also know about the photographs. So these folks who run Facebook pages where the topic is the merits of lynching Mark Redwine and such things, those things are discussed. Those are the folks who come up with the motive. The notion that Dylan is avoiding his father at Walmart, Dad's at Walmart shopping for cornbread and onions. Of course, the 13-year-old went to the video game concert. Any self-respecting 13-year-old would. That's what you do when you go to Walmart with Dad. Fake evidence. That's not proof of anything. The two of them walked away from each other. The witnesses that will be provided as a follow-up to these Investigator Cowan, as described to you on this day, where they're bringing Mr. Redwine up to Middle Mountain to show him locations where remains have been recovered. Cherry-picks this remark that Mark makes at this beautiful vista, where Mark gestures off towards the Pacific Ocean and says, "Did you find anything out there?" All day, Mark had been saying, "I'm to be there, I'm to be there." It was the whole point of him getting in the car with three Plata County Sheriff's Office officials. They were going to take him up to show him locations where they recovered some of the remains. So the first place they stopped on their drive that day, spot where law enforcement said, "This is where we found some stuff." Then the second place they stopped, Mark said, as they're eating lunch, "Did you find anything out there?" And they cherry-picked it as some sort of admission that he did wrong. It's consistent with what you discussed when you're with a bunch of police officers going to look at spots where remains have been found. Mark talks about,
Mr. Moran, that's the sixth time you've done that today. Please watch yourself.
I thought we discussed this in the very different Mr. Redwine is saying, "Did you see the canyon? Did you see anything in the canyon? Did you find anything in the drainage? Did you see that shoe right there? Did you look at the river? Did you find anything to help you do stuff?" It's the topic of discussion for that day. Investigator Cowan literally is talking to himself about spaceships with Bigfoot, community galaxy, and Elvis. And in the moments where Mark is not keeping attention on subjects like that, this is the kind of stuff that police officers are talking about. So it makes sense why a dad who's going up to look at spots where his child's remains is found wouldn't want to let the ball turn to this sort of locker room top stuff, blood and brain on boots. Investigator Goldbright, she's the second investigator. She takes over for Investigator Cowan, who's spraying the boots on the spot. And she uses spikes and dogs and vacuum plates and vehicles to try to suck out the smell of dead bodies. 14 months plus after Dylan's gone missing, she makes strange threats, but I'm not going to be able to stop without us knowing about it. The GPS trackers on it. If he was driving around spreading bones, they would have known. They had the means to follow his every move, to tap his phone. Nothing. They wired his neighbors. He couldn't go to the general store and buy a 6-pack of Pabst without someone turning on the recorder and do that and trying to hear him about the law enforcement telling people up there at the time. Remember, they were saying, in Scuttlebutt thing, there's blood everywhere. Like the doors in the elevator at Albert Hotel in the Shining open, and there's blood on the walls and the ceiling. And we're talking about 60,000 with a grain of salt. They put game cams up on the mountain. They chased away witnesses for providing exculpatory information. This remark about, "Do you worry that he's like a terrorist?" was a woman who was saying that Mark was a child. And that person became less inclined to engage with law enforcement after being treated like that when she mentioned her Algerian fiancé. Investigator Goldbright talking about how she didn't really think that the pictures were the cause. She thinks it's weird, but not a motive. About the child's mom, she's been in an hour out too. Or about another witness, she thought of somebody who bought the stuff. She gets warrants, despite the fact that Mr. Redwine is okay with them coming in the house. He's always welcoming them in. He drives them, they can search them. He's happy to give them whatever information they need. That reminds me that the discussion about how he didn't leave his house on the 19th. Law enforcement told him, remain in the house in case the child calls. They told him to do that. And then they use it as some sort of proof that he'd done something nefarious. The postal worker, Angela Lee, has been delivering mail up in the Bicentennial area for 30 years. When she first speaks of law enforcement on November 20th, 2012, she said, I saw Dylan, I'm positive, I'm certain, and she said that he was walking around in the afternoon on the 19th, well after the prosecution was alleging that Dylan had been cut up, spread out on the map. When she started talking to investigator Goldbright, she goes from positive and certain that the child who she knows, she delivers mail to his father, and he sees the child out there, his father, and getting fishing poles ready. They're playing sports. And she talks to Mr. Redwine at the box. That's how she knows him. That's how mail people say they know a customer in delivering. She doesn't have any dog in the fight. And she goes from positive. And then she's 70%. Investigator Goldbright is working on it. And the days progress. And then she goes down to 70%. And then she's unsure. And then she doesn't know. And then she's claiming to see things that she had not seen, and she's talked out of believing or lying not by law enforcement. There's, I take no joy in doing this. The loss of Dylan and the hurt and brokenness people have experienced around it. But Ms. Hall, Dylan's mom, engaged in parental alienation by the community and encouraged Dylan to see Dylan Redwine, to see his father, Mark Redwine, as punishment, as something bad. She's the main generator of bias in this case. And take examples like hitchhiking. When law enforcement reached out to her to say, "You call it, the random child hitchhiking," she said, "Oh no." That was an occasion where they got in a vehicle with someone that they knew, which turned out not to be the case. And Ryan Nava, the hitchhiking was more than that. And he's saying that's the FBI. But now as time's gone on, the limelight has gotten hot. We're expecting that he'll change his story on that, but originally he said it was something that Dylan would do. There's this strange occasion where Ms. Hall is saying, "I didn't call my divorce lawyer." And the prosecution pointed out they want it to sound like she called law enforcement. That's not the first call she made. The notion that if you're saying something, it should pass through the rubric. You're honest, whether that thing's kind and true or not. The rubric that things were passing through, at least at that time, with the litigiousness around the domestic relations case, was, does this give me a leg up in litigiousness with Mark? Does this make me look bad and Mark? Make me look good and make Mark look bad? That's why, in an instant, decisions are made like, should I say, when asked, did you call the lawyer? I should say no. If the rubric information passes through it. Dylan Redwine, that is the son that was estranged from Mark Redwine, recorded all the conversations with Mr. Redwine, with Mark Redwine. Mr. Redwine was mourning the loss of child needed someone to talk to, and Brandon Redwine used it as an opportunity to record his father. And it was mentioned of how on one recording, there was discussion on one of those child. There were freewheeling discussions for hours that are recorded, and Mark talks about gunshots and knives. Speculate about what might have happened to this child as you might have. Corey Redwine will provide some testimony in this case. And again, there is no joy in pointing out the grief responses that this young man had to losing his brother, and he was death. And whether those feelings are based on something that happened, whether you blame is right or wrong, the feelings are clearly strong. And his feelings are strong towards his father, his police. The cut of the jib testimony that will be provided to you by folks who don't know what it's like to lose their child in circumstances that Mr. Redwine did. We'll talk about how he had these fantasy felt situations, like this one, where law enforcement couldn't understand why he didn't want to come down to the lake when they created this dam. The dogs were alerting, and they thought they were going to pull out the body of his child. And they thought it was real serious. They didn't want to see his beloved Dylan pushed out of the way. There were other occasions where they say that he wasn't going up in the woods to join in searches. When he did go on searches, he was cheered and heckled. When he did go on searches, people figured that he was up there to kick dirt over evidence. When he didn't go on searches, it was because every single thing he did went through the rubric of confirmation bias and the belief that he was a kid's child. We made it up, ladies and gentlemen. We portray a bizarre king that will cause folks to think he's capable of anything. We made up a crime. We made up a motive. We made up the cause of death. They don't know that it's homicide. There's better evidence of animals having something to do with it than a human. We made up the manner of death. They don't know. I want to play this for you with the few minutes I have remaining. This is the moment that Mr. Redwine finds out that they have determined definitively that the child is deceased. This is
we just keep getting more and more stuff because we still have some people out in the field that are not named. So, Mark, I'm telling you, what you're about to see is happening. I'm trying to sense that when you just said what you did. I'm telling you, man, what you're about to see is okay. I want to be prepared for this. You're more than a dry eye and out in the field when we were dealing with this, okay? This is so upsetting. I didn't mean clients with me. Well, we saw before Jeff Mark here. We have some user remains, positively identified human remains, and a DNA feedback this morning, 100% positive. That's Dylan. I'm sorry. I know.
So here we are. This final injury, after all of this unfolded. and a demand for wrongful conviction. It's going to take grit. It's going to take courage on your behalf, ladies and gentlemen. It's going to take the grit and the courage to see through the difficult emotions we experience around the loss of a child. It makes sense that we know things. It makes sense that we impacted law enforcement need to be able to provide answers. But you don't do justice for a wrongfully convicted father something that is not good. Mr. Redwine did not kill his child. Mr. Redwine is not guilty. Second degree murder. Mr. Redwine is not guilty. A child abuse resulting in death. Be brave. Be strong. Do good. Find Mr. Redwine not guilty. Did not kill his child. Thank you. Appreciate your contribution.
If you turn off your, just turn it off, please. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to stop for the day. We want you back here. We want to be ready to go as close to 8 o'clock as we can. It's going to take a little bit longer for you guys to do everything you need to do in the morning for security reasons. I know you've been shown where to park. I'm not sure what time Cindy told you to be there. She might have told you at 10 till. I'd like to get started as soon after 8 as we can. So, in any event. Before you go, I'll admonish you again, and I'll do this repeatedly throughout the trial. Do not discuss this case either amongst yourselves or with anyone else during the course of the trial. Do not initiate, post, or respond to anything about this case on social media. In fairness to the parties of this lawsuit, you should keep an open mind throughout the trial. You should reach your decision only during your final deliberations. Do not permit any third person to discuss this case in your presence. If anyone attempts to do so, please let me know. During the course of the trial, do not talk to any witnesses or with the defendant or the lawyers in the case. Do not attempt to gather any information on your own. Do not engage in any outside reading in the case. This includes on the internet and on social media. Do not attempt to visit any places mentioned in the case. Do not read about the case in, again, newspaper, obtain information, radio, television, internet, social media, or any other media source. Do not in any other way try and learn about the case outside the courtroom. You must base your verdict solely upon the evidence presented at the trial. With that, we'll see you tomorrow morning. Thank you for your attention today. Everybody rise for the jury, please. Okay, the record can reflect the jury has left the courtroom. A couple things that I want to bring up. From both sides, we need copies of everything that was presented. The PowerPoint that was presented, we'll mark it as a court exhibit. So make sure you get that to us this week. The other thing is, which I couldn't really tell what it was, and then I realized that transcript was shown. There hasn't been any determination, at least by the court, that that transcript is accurate. I know it was provided to me by prosecution in terms of helping me listen to what was on the audio and video recordings that we saw. Unless there's a proper foundation laid for a transcript to be shown to the jury, either as an exhibit or as during a closing argument, I'm not going to allow it. So I'm just warning you guys. I know you didn't know that. I'm just letting both sides know that transcripts you have to be very careful. So is there anything for me to say?
Yeah, thank you.
Go ahead.
One concern, people announced over the lunch hour they intended to call Joe Zavala, who I don't think on there. They're good faith with, so that's fine. It's discovery, it's door, that. They said that they're changing their plans on call and tomorrow. We asked for updated contact.
Okay, I'm sure that can happen. So, any problem?
No.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Anything else?
Well, on the same time, you guys have been looking at Bill, filling in. We've never heard of him.
We're all looking at each other a little flummoxed. Maybe that was done in error, but we'll find out what that correspondence was, and we'll do it.
All right. All right. Let's be ready to go at 8 o'clock. I doubt the jury will be ready, but we can at least try. All right. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Okay, are you